This is LBC.
Let's get a view from Smita Tharoor, who is author of the podcast series Stories of Unconscious Bias. Smita is an unconscious bias trainer and joins me live. Thank you very much for joining the programme. What did you make of Bill Michaels' comments saying there is no such thing as unconscious bias?
I think I'll respond to the second part of what he said, which is unconscious bias training doesn't work if people don't care. And I would agree with him on that, because why are we having unconscious bias training? What is unconscious bias? It's made up of our life experiences, fundamentally about our narratives, what I call my backpack theory. You know, what has influenced me? Why is it I'm jumping to conclusions? I mean, very, very often, for example, I could have gone through a traumatic experience when I was younger, and I want to keep safe and never have that experience again. And so that goes into my unconscious bias backpack, and that protects me from having that experience again. So it's not about bad and good. And my fear is this whole idea of unconscious bias training and what is happening in the West is it is being seen to put people on the defensive. It is about bad and good, black versus white, man versus woman. I mean, you know, whatever. You can think of any of the different headline examples of difference. But it's not about that. It's just about humanity. It's about you and me. It's about nuances. It's about cultural influences. It's about stuff that goes on in our lives without us even realizing it.
Do you not think it needs a rebrand, this unconscious bias, the term unconscious bias, because I do think it immediately puts people on the defensive because it suggests that they are biased without knowing it. And that's an affront to many people who would think that it would be horrendous to be biased about someone because of the colour of their skin or where they were born, in a way that they didn't know about but was evident to other people. Do you think it needs a change of terminology here?
No, I mean, you do have a point there, but I was just kind of smiling to myself because the word bias in itself can be positive, and we need to appreciate that. It's just simply put a preference. It doesn't have to be this headline discriminatory negative feeling or attitude. Listen, I like the look of you because of X. But the outcome could be unfair. But what I always say to anyone who's asking me about these two words is that there is no one on earth who does not have unconscious biases. It's perfectly normal to have it. Don't beat yourselves up about it. Can we rebrand it? Well, I think rather than rebrand it, why don't we just think about what it means to us as human beings? This is us. This is who we are. This is how we're made up. Lots of different aspects of our lives. Let's self-reflect. Let's think about how we might be influenced without us realizing it, and don't beat ourselves up about it. It's only when we make an opinion or an assumption or a judgment that has an unfair outcome based on whatever we're doing. Say a work-based, I'm recruiting somebody and I instinctively like the look of you, so I give you the job rather than the other person for some reason. Yeah. Then we have to challenge ourselves.
And in that is, I think, another difficulty of this, which is understanding and showing clearly the effects of either unconscious bias or unconscious bias training. So how do we know that various injustices, unfairnesses in life are down to unconscious bias?
There's so much research done out there. In fact, I was just hearing something earlier this morning about stereotype threat and the fact that it doesn't matter whether you're white or black or man or woman, but based on the stereotypes that are going on around us historically for lots of different reasons. I'm not going to bother to expand on any of these, but for that reason, we then start feeling lesser about ourselves. And then when we start feeling lesser about ourselves, we might then jump to a conclusion about something that you might have said to me based on what I'm seeing about myself. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's actually very nuanced. This idea, this topic, this understanding of unconscious bias.
But you're convinced that you can absolutely point to areas of injustices and unfairnesses and say this is a direct reflection of unconscious bias that exists among these people.
More often than not, I would say it is because of our own personal influences and my own upbringing. I mean, I don't know what was going through Bill Michaels' head when he said what he did. Right. It sounds like he was talking about the lack of care that people were having when they were attending the training.
Yeah.
It's more than just that one topic. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I understand. Yes, I do get the point. But on the training itself and the efficacy of the training itself and what it brings out, Bill Michaels saying every single unconscious bias training that's ever been done, nothing has ever improved. I note that a study conducted by the government's Behavioural Insights team has concluded, quotes, there is currently no evidence that unconscious bias training changes behaviour in the long term or improves workplace equality in terms of representation of women, ethnic minorities or other minority groups. And the government has taken the decision to wind down the unconscious bias training that civil services go through. So what can we say comes out of unconscious bias training?
Well, see, the point of this particular thing that you just read out is why are we doing this unconscious bias training? Are we doing it to prove a point that we are inclusive human beings? Because that is not the way to go about doing any kind of a changed behavior. Because unconscious bias means when we have completed the training, what I would hope for is that the participants who've attended the training are thinking about themselves, not about the other people who might have shown them discrimination, not about putting people on the defensive. What are my stories? What could I have done differently? How can I change as a human being? It is so much more about our own self-reflection. So unconscious bias training is actually more about creating a more inclusive, harmonious environment rather than wrong and right. And my fear is that more and more training is being done for the latter reasons.
To be honest with you, it strikes me that it sounds more like therapy, individual therapy, than a method to find the ways in which people have either looked down upon or been unfair towards different people. If the aim is self-reflection, as you say.
I agree with you. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I have this podcast, Stories of Unconscious Bias, because I'm just coming up to the end of season 3. So that's 33 interviews out there. I've talked to people around the world, most of whom I've never met. And just listening to their stories makes us realize how simple and how connected we all are the world over in terms of our own unconscious biases. Certainly within training workshops, I encourage the participants to talk about their own personal stories. Some do, and they feel better for it. So is it therapeutic? Yes, it is to some degree.
But if you know, we're going to run out of time. I should have done this earlier, Smitha, to be honest with you. But you know, in my so for you know, let's make it about me if we're not going to create somebody else. I had a very happy childhood. Two parents who were both teachers. Very sort of, you know, bog standard middle class upbringing. Here I am, white guy. I don't believe that I possess any unconscious biases towards people, but who knows? I'm a product of my upbringing. What?
I'm smiling when I say that. But of course you're wrong, right? I mean, I'm going to make up a story on your behalf.
Okay.
So let's imagine when you're in school and you go to school in London and your best friend happens to be somebody who's of Indian origin. Mm-hmm. And that is still your best friend. That particular person, boy or girl, is not the point. It's not about the gender. And so as a result, you have this connection with this person, this boy, let's just call him a boy, your best friend from the age of about 8, from primary school, you went through secondary school, you went to university, you've stayed connected forever. And as a result, you have a very close love and connection to India, Indian food, all kinds of things through him. Now, fast forward to where you're at now, and let's imagine that you're doing something like interviewing for somebody within your team. And you've got 3 final candidates who come in, one of whom happens to be of Indian origin. It doesn't matter what the gender is. Mm-hmm. Your unconscious bias will kick in and you will have a positive affinity towards that person without you realizing it. Therefore, to be fair to the other 2 candidates, you need to stop, you need to pause, you need to challenge yourself and say, I better stop a little bit. Let me be fair and let me listen genuinely for what their skills are, rather than just look at that one person who happens to be reminding me of my best friend, and therefore I might end up giving that person a job.
It's really, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Smitha Tharoor, you're the author of the podcast series Stories of Unconscious Bias and an unconscious bias trainer.